How did a single meeting in a German drawing room, attended by 14 countries and not one of them African, end up drawing the borders that over 1 billion people still live inside today? In the winter of 1884, the most powerful men in Europe gathered in Berlin around an enormous map of Africa. Over the next 100 days, without a single African in the room, they laid down the rules by which an entire continent would be carved up. They called it the Berlin Conference. And to understand how one meeting could reshape the lives of generations, you have to understand what was happening in the years just before it. For most of the 19th century, Europe barely controlled Africa at all. As late as 1870, only around 1/10 of the continent was under European rule, and almost all of that was a thin ribbon of trading posts and forts clinging to the coast. The vast interior remained governed by African kingdoms, empires, and states, Asante, Sokoto, Ethiopia, Buganda, most of which Europeans had never even mapped. Africa was not empty. It was simply not yet conquered. That changed with astonishing speed. New quinine treatments let Europeans survive malaria long enough to push inland. The steamship and the railway made rivers and distances conquerable. And the machine gun handed small European forces a lethal advantage over far larger African armies. Suddenly, the interior was reachable, and Europe's industrial economies were desperate for its rubber, its ivory, its copper, and its gold. The spark, though, was one man's private ambition. King Leopold II of Belgium, ruler of one of Europe's smallest countries, wanted a colony of his own, and he had set his sights on the enormous basin of the Congo River. He dressed his project up as a humanitarian mission to end the slave trade and bring free trade to Central Africa. In reality, he was assembling a personal empire. As Leopold's agents signed treaties with Congolese chiefs, France and Portugal scrambled to stake rival claims, and the whole continent tipped toward a chaotic, uncoordinated land grab that Europe's leaders feared could end in war between them. So Germany's Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called everyone to the table. On the 15th of November 1884, representatives of 14 nations, including Britain, France, Portugal, and the United States, sat down in Berlin. Sultan Bargash of Zanzibar asked to attend, to speak for the people whose land was being discussed. He was refused. For over 3 months, the future of Africa was negotiated entirely by outsiders. Here is the crucial thing to understand. The Berlin Conference did not draw most of Africa's borders directly. What it did was far more consequential. It set the rules of the game, and those rules made the scramble inevitable. The most important of them was a principle called effective occupation. From now on, a European power could not simply claim African territory on paper. To make a claim stick, it had to actually be there, to sign treaties with local rulers, raise its flag, and establish some form of administration on the ground. On its surface, this sounded almost reasonable. In practice, it was a starting gun. Every power now had an incentive to physically seize as much land as fast as possible before a rival got there first. A polite conference designed to prevent a chaotic rush had instead formally launched one. The conference agreed 2 other things that mattered. The Congo and Niger rivers, the great highways into the interior, were declared free for the ships of all nations, and the enormous Congo basin was opened to free trade for every signatory. Then, in the arrangement that would become the conference's darkest legacy, Leopold's claim to the Congo was recognized. Within months, an area 76 times the size of Belgium became the personal property of a single king, not even of the Belgian state, but of the man himself. He named it, without irony, the Congo Free State. The forced labor rubber regime he imposed there would kill millions of Congolese people and remains one of the deadliest episodes of the entire colonial era. With the rules set, the scramble accelerated into one of the fastest land seizures in human history. In 1870, roughly 1/10 of Africa had been under European control. By 1914, just 3 decades later, that figure was about 90%. Only 2 states remained independent: Ethiopia, which had defeated an invading Italian army at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, and Liberia, founded by formerly enslaved Americans. Everywhere else, the continent had been partitioned. And this is where the meeting's true legacy lies, not in who owned what, but in how the lines were drawn. Because the men dividing Africa were working from incomplete maps and their own strategic interests, they drew borders along lines of longitude and latitude, along rivers, along whatever a negotiator's pencil found convenient. What those lines almost never followed were the realities on the ground, the territories of nations, the boundaries of kingdoms, the maps of language and community that Africans themselves recognized. The result is written across the continent to this day. Look at a map of Africa and you will see something you see almost nowhere else on Earth. Long, ruler-straight borders, drawn by people who had never walked the land they were dividing. Those lines split hundreds of ethnic and linguistic groups straight down the middle. The Maasai were divided between what became Kenya and Tanzania. Countless communities woke up to find a colonial border running through the middle of their world, and, just as damaging, utterly different peoples were forced together inside new states they had never chosen, with borders they had never agreed to. Many of the conflicts that would follow independence, over land, over belonging, over who truly counted as a citizen, trace back, at least in part, to lines drawn in that Berlin drawing room. When Rwanda's colonial rulers later hardened the divide between Hutu and Tutsi, they were building on a logic the conference had helped set in motion. The men in Berlin were gone within 100 days, but the map they sketched outlived every one of them. A single meeting, held on another continent, with not one African voice permitted in the room, drew the outline of modern Africa. And more than a century later, over 1 billion people still live inside the lines those strangers left behind.